The first time I realized I was only a background character in my own family's story, I was 12 years old and holding my honor roll certificate over a sink full of dishes. Brooke was in the living room, glitter still on her cheeks from winning Most Spirited at school, while our parents argued about whether her trophy should go on the mantel or in a glass case. My certificate ended up stuck to the fridge with a weak magnet that kept sliding down, as if even the paper knew its place. Years later, nothing much had changed. The house in Willow Creek had new curtains and different throw pillows, but the roles were the same. Brooke in the center of the frame, everyone else orbiting around her like it was gravity instead of habit. Sunday dinners followed a script so worn it barely needed words. My mother moved between stove and table in practice loops, my father toggled between the news and his phone, and Brooke arrived 10 minutes late in something tight and expensive-looking, complaining about traffic or followers or the lighting in the restaurant she'd been to the night before. When I walked in, I carried grocery bags or a dessert I knew no one would notice came from a bakery. My mother would glance at me, relieved about the extra side dish, and say, "Oh good, you're here. Can you set the table?" It was never a question. By the time Brooke breezed through the door with a dramatic "Hey, family," the plates were in place and the food was ready, as if she'd summoned it all by stepping over the threshold. I'd be at the sink, rinsing a pan, my hair pulled back, my good blouse covered by an old apron that wasn't even mine. "Tell them about your new collab," my mother said that night, sliding roasted chicken onto a platter as Brooke scrolled on her phone for a screenshot. "The one with the skincare brand." Brooke lit up, turning the screen toward my father like she was unveiling a masterpiece. "It's not just skincare," she said. "It's like a whole lifestyle thing. They're flying me to Miami for the shoot. Nathan says it's huge for my personal brand." Nathan. The name came out wrapped in pride. I'd heard it before in rushed updates and filtered photos, always attached to something impressive. His firm, his car, his family's house somewhere by the water. I'd seen his face in exactly 2 pictures: square jaw, good suit, smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Handsome in the way of people who know they are. My father whistled low. "Miami, huh? That's big time, kiddo." Brooke grinned, basking in the attention. "It's just the beginning." My mother turned to me almost as an afterthought. "How's work at the courthouse, Harper? Still keeping the paperwork straight for everyone?" There it was. The line. Delivered gently, with the same rhythm it always had, like a catchphrase in a sitcom. I placed the last fork down and sat, smoothing my napkin over my lap. "Still there," I said. "Busy lately." "Good to stay busy," my father replied, already reaching for the potatoes. "The government always needs organized people." Maddie, our cousin, caught my eye from across the table. She'd come straight from her shift at the hospital, still in scrubs, her hair pulled into a messy bun. There was a flicker of something in her expression, sympathy, maybe, or recognition. She knew, or at least suspected, that my days didn't look like stacks of forms and ringing phones. She'd never pressed. She just watched, the way someone watches a tightrope walker and quietly hopes they make it to the other side. Brooke launched into a story about a brand event downtown, about how Nathan's coworker had recognized her from a reel, about the dress she'd worn and how many saves the post had. My mother laughed at all the right places, my father offered the occasional, "That's my girl," and I cut my chicken into neat, silent pieces. Somewhere between her description of the rooftop view and the number of zeros in the firm's latest deal, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't have to look to know what it might be. An email from a clerk, a reminder about a motion due, an update on a case that would be waiting for me in the morning. "Put that away, Harper," my mother said mildly, not looking at me. "It's family time." I slipped the phone back into my pocket without checking the notification. It wasn't worth the conversation that would follow if I explained that family time or not. Certain messages couldn't wait. Not when people's lives sat in folders with my name on them. Not when one decision on my desk could shift the ground under someone's feet for years. None of that fit at this table, not between the chicken and the talk of flights and filters. So Nathan's thinking of hosting an engagement party, Brooke said, dropping the sentence into the middle of the table like a lit match. Soon. At his parents' place in Harbor Point. My mother's hand went to her chest. Engagement party? Brooke smiled, smug and soft all at once. He hasn't officially asked yet, but it's coming. He's been talking to his mom about dates. My father put his fork down. Harbor Point, he repeated, tasting the name. Everyone in Willow Creek knew Harbor Point. Gated. Water views. Houses that looked like catalog pages. That's something, Brooke. Of course it is, she said. You should see their backyard. It's like a wedding venue. His mom already loves me. She said she's never seen Nathan so serious about anyone. The room buzzed with excitement, questions, imaginary plans. Did he talk to a jeweler yet? What would she wear? Would there be a band? Maddie offered a quiet congratulations, and even that felt louder than anything I'd said all evening. Harper, you'll help, right? My mother asked suddenly, turning toward me with the same unthinking certainty she used when asking me to grab something from the pantry. You're so good with details. You can help set up, make sure everything runs smoothly. Brooke nodded, not in thanks but in agreement with the assignment. Yeah, you're basically like an event coordinator anyway, right? Keeping schedules and files and stuff. She laughed lightly, not maliciously enough to call it cruelty, but sharp enough to sting. You're totally built for that. I held her gaze for a second, long enough to see that she genuinely believed it, that my skills, my long days, my bone-deep exhaustion all translated to good with logistics and nothing more. My tongue pressed against the back of my teeth, words lining up that I did not say. That I worked under a state seal, not a conference room banner. That when I sat down at my desk, people stood up. Instead, I lifted my water glass. If you need help, I said evenly, I'll be there. My mother smiled, already relieved. See? That's my steady girl. Always reliable. The conversation flowed back to Brooke and Harbor Point, to what the neighbors would say when they heard, to how my parents would finally have a connection to real money. I let their voices blur into a low hum and focused on the details of the table, the tiny chip on the rim of my plate, the way the candlelight caught the curve of Maddie's spoon, the faint ring of sauce on my father's napkin. Small, ordinary things I could control. Later, when dinner was over and Brooke was in the driveway taking pictures in the good light, my mother pressed leftovers into my hands like an apology she didn't know she owed. Don't be a stranger, she said. You know we're proud of you too. You're just more private about your life. I nodded and took the containers, their warmth seeping through the plastic into my palms. On the short walk to my car, Maddie caught up with me, her steps quick on the cracked driveway. You working tomorrow? She asked. Yeah, I said. It's a full docket. She tilted her head. Big stuff. Big enough, I replied. Maddie studied my face for a second, then smiled faintly. I'll probably see your name in the paper before I hear it at this table, she said. Just don't forget some of us are paying attention, okay? The tightness in my chest loosened a fraction. I know, I said. Driving back toward the city, the streets of Willow Creek gave way to wider roads and taller buildings. By the time I pulled into the lot near my apartment, The sky had deepened to a rich, steady blue. I carried the leftovers upstairs in one hand, my work bag in the other, and set them both on the counter. Across the room, hanging on the back of a chair, my black robe waited for Monday. In the morning, I would put it on, step into a courtroom where no one called me steady girl or event coordinator, and listen as attorneys rose when I entered. At the Lane family table, I was the quiet sister who made sure the glasses were full and the food got to the right plates. In court, people addressed me as, Your Honor. One world saw me as a helper. The other saw me as the final word. Up until that Sunday night, those worlds had managed to stay neatly separate. The engagement party at Harbor Point was about to change that. The first person who speaks to me on Monday morning does it without looking up. Morning, Judge Lane, the security officer says as I place my bag on the conveyor belt. The Charleston County Justice Center always feels colder than the air outside, no matter the season. The doors whoosh shut behind me, sealing out the humid coastal air and the smell of wet pavement, replacing it with recycled chill and the faint scent of floor polish. I slip off my watch and place it in the gray plastic tray, push my bag forward, and step through the metal detector. The machine stays quiet. The officer nods me through with the same respectful half-smile he gives me every weekday. Out there, I'm Harper, the admin at the courthouse. In here, I'm the reason people straighten their backs when I enter a room. Upstairs, the hallway outside my courtroom is already filling. A cluster of attorneys in dark suits stand in a loose semicircle, talking in low tones. A man in a wrinkled polo sits on a bench staring at his shoes, his knee bouncing. A woman in a blazer clutches a folder to her chest like a shield. The door to my chambers is closed, but the light is on inside. My clerk, Denise, arrived before me as she always does. When I walk in, she has a stack of files waiting on the edge of my desk and a coffee that's exactly how I take it. Good morning, Judge, she says. Docket's full. We start with the Carter matter. The name lands with a tiny thud in my chest. Carter. There are probably a dozen Carters in the county, maybe more, but only one whose picture I've been seeing in Brooks' filtered posts for the last few months. I pick up the top file, scan the caption. Hargrove Development, LLC v. Palmetto Vista Software, Incorporated Counsel for the Plaintiff, Nathaniel J. Carter. The date stamp takes me back almost a year. I remember the case before I remember the man. High-value dispute over a custom software build for a waterfront project, accusations of breach and counterclaims over delays. Long days, long arguments, a gallery filled with people in expensive clothes pretending they weren't worried. I remember the tone in the room when I delivered my ruling more clearly than I remember Nathan's face. Right, I say, keeping my expression neutral. Let's get started. The robe hangs on a padded hook behind my desk, black and heavy in a way that has nothing to do with fabric. I slide it on, feeling the familiar shift as it settles over my shoulders, covering my blouse, my necklace, the parts of me that my family recognizes. Out there, I pour drinks and set tables. In here, I sit alone at a raised wooden bench and speak in the plural. The court finds, the court orders. I check my notes one more time, then nod to Denise. We're ready. When the bailiff opens the door from chambers, the sound of the courtroom flows in, papers rustling, chairs scraping, low voices cutting off mid-sentence. I step through and take my seat. Everyone stands. It's a small gesture, ritualistic and automatic, but it still hits me in the chest some mornings. The same woman who was asked to make sure the napkins are filled last night now has a roomful of people on their feet, waiting for her to tell them to sit. You may be seated, I say. The case list moves quickly at first. A continuance here, a plea agreement there, a motion argued and taken under advisement. The rhythm is familiar, almost soothing. Counsel state their names, the stenographer's keys click, the wall clock ticks steadily on. By mid-morning, we reach the corporate dispute. Calling Hargrove Development, LLC versus Palmetto Vista Software, Incorporated, the clerk announces. Case number 21, CV 518. Two sets of attorneys approach the tables. On the plaintiff's side, three men in nearly identical dark suits and polished shoes. The one in the middle steps forward. "Good morning, Your Honor. Nathan Carter for the plaintiff." There he is. If I hadn't seen his face in Brooke's photos, I might not have connected him to the man from the hearing months ago. In person, he seems taller, his features sharper, his presence calibrated for a room like this. His tie is a conservative navy, his hair just slightly out of place at the temple, like he's run his hand through it on the way in. When he looks up at me, it's with the quick assessment of someone used to measuring judges, weighing how far he can push. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," I say evenly. On the other side, counsel for the defense introduces herself, a woman with tired eyes and a stack of binders that looks heavier than she is. We plunge into argument. They're here on an enforcement issue, one side claiming the other hasn't complied fully with my previous order. Carter's voice is smooth, practiced. He cites paragraphs and subclauses from the contract, my prior ruling, an email that supposedly proves bad faith. The defense responds with timelines and technical explanations, pointing out that the plaintiff's own delays forced the software team to rewrite half the code. It would be easy, almost comforting, to get lost in the legal minutiae, to let the language of obligations and remedies drown out everything else. That's part of why I love this work. The rules are written down. The standards are known. No one interrupts halfway through to talk about brand deals or engagement parties. No one tells me I'm good with paperwork, like it's a consolation prize. "Mr. Carter," I say after a while, cutting through his latest flourish, "you're arguing that the defendant's failure to meet the revised rollout date was willful. But according to Exhibit F, your client approved the change order that necessitated the additional testing phase. Explain how that reconciles with your position." For a split second, something like surprise flashes across his face. He recovers quickly, adjusting his stance, shifting to a slightly different angle. He answers, but I can tell he's recalibrating, shaving off rhetoric in favor of substance. "I've seen it before. The moment an attorney realizes I've actually read everything and am not impressed by posturing." Hours later, after back-and-forth arguments and a short recess, I deliver my decision. I speak slowly enough for the reporter to keep up, but not so slowly that anyone can pretend the words aren't landing. The court finds that while the defendant's performance was delayed, the plaintiff's own conduct materially contributed to the timeline issues at stake, I say. Accordingly, the plaintiff's motion for sanctions is denied. The prior order stands, with the following clarifications. As I list them, I watch Carter out of the corner of my eye. He doesn't huff or roll his eyes the way some do when they lose ground. His jaw tightens once, then sets. He nods when I finish, a small, almost respectful incline of the head. "Understood, Your Honor," he says. When I rise to leave, everyone stands again. I step back into chambers, the door closing softly behind me, and exhale for what feels like the first time in an hour. Denise hands me a new stack of files and a sticky note about a scheduling conflict next week. The world keeps moving. "You've got a call from your mother at lunchtime," she says apologetically. "Came in while you were on the bench. Did she leave a message?" I ask. Denise nods. "Just said to remind you about Sunday. Something about Harbor Point." Of course. Even in this space, the other life finds a way in. I sink into my chair, the robe pooling around me like a shadow. On my desk, beside the neat stack of motions and orders, sits a framed photo of my law school graduating class. I'm somewhere in the middle of the group, robe open, cap crooked, smiling like a person who hadn't yet learned that some people will always refuse to see the full picture. I press the heels of my hands briefly into my eyes, then straighten. There's no room for distraction here. The afternoon calendar is just as full as the mornings, each case a small world of its own, waiting for someone to make a decision that sticks. By the time court adjourns for the day, the sky outside the tall windows has shifted from bright to the dull gold of late afternoon. I change out of my robe, hang it back on its hook, and slip into my coat. In the elevator down, a young public defender nods at me and says, "Good rulings today, Your Honor." In the lobby, a woman I just sentenced to probation wipes at her eyes and still whispers, "Thank you," as I pass. Respect and resentment, gratitude and anger, all braided together under the same title. Outside, the air is warmer than it was that morning. I walk to my car past a group of tourists taking pictures of the courthouse facade, their angles wide enough that they'll never see the people who walked out of those doors feeling heavier or lighter than when they walked in. My phone buzzes again. Another message from my mother. Another from Brooke, a link to a photo of a white tent strung with lights over a stone patio. "Harbor Point is going to be beautiful," she's written. "You'll love it. Wear something nice. You'll be in the background of a lot of pictures." I stand on the sidewalk for a moment, the courthouse at my back, the city spread in front of me. In one world, my name sits at the top of orders that change outcomes. In the other, I'm a blur behind someone else's spotlight. 4 years, I've kept those worlds separate, switching masks depending on which door I'm walking through. The engagement party at Harbor Point isn't just another family event. Nathan Carter has already stood in my courtroom and lost a piece of the argument under my gavel. He just doesn't know yet that the woman he'll be introduced to as Brooke's sister, the courthouse admin, is the same Judge Lane who told him no in front of a full gallery. That collision is coming, whether anyone is ready for it or not. Harbor Point looked like the kind of place my parents used to drive through slowly on Sundays, windows down, pretending we'd taken a wrong turn instead of making a pilgrimage. White fences, wide porches, lawns manicured so sharply they almost looked fake. The guard at the gate checked my name against a neatly printed list before lifting the barrier, and just like that, I was inside a world my family had only ever admired from the outside. Nathan's parents' house sat near the water, its columns and double porch framed by old oaks draped in Spanish moss. The driveway curved in a polite arc toward a 3-car garage, and beyond the house, I could see the glint of the marsh and a strip of open sky where the sun would eventually set. In the backyard, a stone patio stretched out like a stage. White folding chairs lined up in rows, rented heaters glowed softly near the edges, and a web of string lights hung overhead, waiting for dusk to make them magical. A white tent covered a long table already set with glassware and plates. It looked less like a family party and more like a carefully curated photo shoot. I parked near the end of the driveway, where the cars were more modest, older sedans and compact SUVs mixed with the occasional truck. Closer to the house, the vehicles gleamed newer and more expensive, lined up like a quiet hierarchy. Inside, the Carter's foyer opened onto polished wood floors and high ceilings. A woman in a navy dress, slim and composed, appeared almost immediately. "You must be Harper," she said, offering a hand. Her nails were neat, her jewelry understated but clearly not cheap. "I'm Caroline, Nathan's mother. We're so glad you could make it." "Thank you for having me," I said. Before I could say more, my mother appeared from the hallway, her face flushed and bright. "There you are," she said. "We've been trying to call you. Can you help outside? We're still setting up the drinks table." "Of course," I replied. Caroline smiled, already turning toward the kitchen. "You girls are such a help. Brooke said you're wonderful with details, Harper." The kitchen was bigger than my entire living room, all marble and stainless steel, every surface gleaming. My father stood at the island, twisting the wire off a bottle of champagne like it might explode in his face. My mother was rinsing strawberries in the sink as if she owned the place, chatting with Caroline about caterers like they were old friends. "Grab those napkins," my mother said, nodding toward a stack of folded white squares on the counter. "They need them at the bar outside. And check the ice. We're already running low." I balanced the napkins in one arm, hooked a bag of ice with the other, and pushed through the sliding glass doors onto the patio. The air smelled faintly of salt and something citrus from the garnish bowls. A man in a black shirt was arranging bottles behind a portable bar, his expression focused. "Napkins?" I asked. "Perfect," he said, grateful. "Right there." Thank you. I dumped the ice into a cooler, wiped my hands on my skirt, and took a moment to look around. A few guests had already drifted outside, drinks in hand, admiring the view. The marsh grasses shimmered pale green and gold in the late afternoon light, and the water beyond it caught the sun in broken, moving pieces. It was beautiful, in that effortless way money often is. Harper! Maddie's voice came from behind me. When I turned, she was halfway across the patio, slightly out of breath, tugging at the sleeve of a dress that didn't quite fit the way she wanted. You made it, I said, relieved. Barely, she replied. Your mom had me rolling cutlery in those little napkin sleeves for half an hour. I'm not even sure I'm invited as a cousin or as unpaid staff. Could be both, I said. She laughed, but her eyes swept over the scene, taking in the tent, the chairs, the Carter relatives beginning to cluster in small groups. It's a different world, huh? Seems that way. Before we could say more, the sliding door opened again. This time, my parents stepped out with Caroline, all three of them wearing the look of people about to unveil something important. Behind them, Brooke appeared. For a second, the party seemed to tilt in her direction, the way rooms always did. She wore a pale dress that caught the light with every step, her hair styled in loose waves that looked deliberately effortless. Her smile was wide, practiced, directed at the crowd rather than any one person. There was a collective murmur of appreciation, the soft soundtrack of admiration that had followed her since high school. Everyone, Caroline said, raising her voice slightly. Thank you for being here to celebrate Brooke and Nathan. Brooke slipped her arm through Caroline's and leaned in, eyes shining. Then she turned and saw me near the bar. Harper, she called, her tone bright. Come here a second. Every pair of eyes near us shifted in my direction. I walked over, careful not to think about the bag of ice I'd just hauled or the napkins still stacked behind me. This is my sister, Brooke announced, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. Harper Lane. A few polite smiles, a couple of nods. Someone said, Nice to meet you, in a voice already drifting away. She works at the courthouse, Brooke added, as if that completed the picture. She keeps everything organized. Admin, scheduling, that kind of thing. You know how it is. You must be very detail-oriented, one of Caroline's friends said. Something like that, I replied. Brooke laughed lightly. We joke that she's basically everyone's assistant down there. She always knows where the files are. The words landed with the familiar weight. The difference this time was the setting. It wasn't our small dining room in Willow Creek. It wasn't a family friend asking absent-minded questions over pie. It was a patio full of people who'd never met me, taking their first and possibly only impressions straight from Brooke's mouth. I'm sure it's important work, Caroline's friend added quickly, the way people do when they sense they might have stepped near something sharp. I took a slow breath, let it out. It keeps me busy, I said. Brooke gave my shoulder a squeeze, already turning back toward the tent, toward the guests waiting for her to move things along. She'll make sure everything runs smoothly tonight, she said. She's good at that. Maddie caught my eye from her spot near the edge of the group, her mouth pressed into a flat line. She saw it. She always did. As the evening unfolded, my role stayed consistent. I checked on the champagne, guided a late-arriving cousin to their seat, carried an extra chair from the garage when someone miscounted. My parents floated between groups, talking about Harbor Point like they'd lived there for years, dropping hints about Brooke's future in tones that made it sound inevitable. Every now and then, my mother glanced over at me with a pleased smile, like she was proud of how well I was helping. It wasn't until just before dinner that I saw Nathan up close. He came out from the house with his father, both in crisp shirts and tailored jackets, their conversation easy. Nathan's eyes moved over the setup with quick, assessing sweeps, a man used to taking stock of a room. When his gaze landed on me, there was a flicker of something like recognition, then confusion. He nodded politely, the way you do with any guest you can't place. Ready. Brooke asked him, taking his arm. As I'll ever be, he said, smiling down at her. Caroline tapped a spoon against her glass to get everyone's attention. The conversations quieted, people turned, cameras were raised. Brooke and Nathan stood at the head of the long table under the tent, the marsh and the sinking sun framing them perfectly. I slipped into a seat closer to the far end, beside Maddie on one side and an empty chair on the other. "Thank you all for being here," Nathan began, his voice steady and warm. He talked about how he'd met Brooke, about their first date, about how quickly she became the center of his life. The crowd laughed at the right moments, murmured approval at others. It was a good speech. He knew how to hold attention, how to give people the story they wanted. When he finished, Brooke took the glass from him, her eyes shiny, her voice just a touch tremulous for effect. "I just want to say," she began, "that I feel incredibly lucky. Not just to have Nathan, but to have all of you here. My family, his family. I know I talk a lot," a ripple of laughter, "but tonight isn't about me for once. It's about us." She glanced over the table, letting her gaze linger on various faces. When it landed on me, something in her smile sharpened. "And I have to mention my sister," she said. "Harper. She's been such a help with everything. She keeps things together at the courthouse, and apparently out here too." A few people turned to look at me. I managed a small smile, lifted my glass slightly. "Some people argue big cases," Brooke went on, nodding toward Nathan. "And some people answer phones and file things so the rest of the world can function, right, Harp?" There was a soft scattering of polite chuckles. It wasn't a cruel line, not on paper, but it was a public cementing of the story, laid down like a permanent marker stroke. My face warmed. The glass stem felt slippery between my fingers. At the head of the table, Nathan's expression twitched almost imperceptibly. His eyes stayed on Brooke, but his jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. Then he looked down the table, past my parents, past the Carters' friends, past the cousins, until his gaze met mine. For the first time that night, he really looked at me. The tent seemed to quiet, even though the murmurs and clinks continued. His eyes traveled over my face with a searching intensity one recognized from court, the look of someone trying to place a witness, a precedent, a ruling. I saw the moment something tugged at his memory. His brow furrowed, just a little. Caroline raised her glass, bringing the focus back to the head of the table. "To Brooke and Nathan," she said. "To a lifetime of happiness." "To Brooke and Nathan," the guests echoed. I took a sip of champagne, the bubbles sharp on my tongue. Maddie leaned slightly toward me, her voice barely audible over the others. "He knows you from somewhere," she murmured. "I know," I said quietly. Dinner began, plates appearing and disappearing in a practiced rhythm. Conversation swelled and broke in waves. My parents peppered Nathan's father with questions about Harbor Point, about their club membership, about boat slips and HOA fees, the words tumbling out in eager bursts. Across the table, Brooke did what she always did, kept the spotlight on herself with stories, jokes, and gentle touches on Nathan's arm. But every so often, I felt his gaze drift back down the table, like an actor missing his line and scanning the script for help. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. No one was shouting. But something in that tent had shifted, a tiny crack in the script Brooke had written for all of us. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure I was willing to patch it over. By the time the plates were cleared and the dessert spoons clinked against glass, the sun had slipped low enough that the string lights overhead did most of the work. The tent glowed softly, the marsh beyond turned into a dark, rippling silhouette. Conversations had mellowed along with the light. Laughter was quieter now, closer to the table. "Before we wrap up," Caroline said, tapping her glass again, "I think it might be nice to hear a few words from the families. Richard. Elaine." My parents obliged, of course. My father spoke about how proud they were of Brooke, how they'd always known she was destined for big things. My mother talked about how Nathan felt like part of the family already, how this union was a blessing. Her voice wobbled once for effect, and someone handed her a napkin. "Harper," Caroline added lightly when my parents sat down. "Would you like to say anything as the big sister?" A few heads turned my way. I could feel Brooke's eyes on me, sharp and cautious. I could have declined, could have waved it off with a joke. Instead, I stood, my chair scraping softly against the stone. "I'll keep it short," I said. "Brooke and I have always been very different. She knows how to light up a room. I tend to hang back and make sure the lights stay on." There was a small ripple of laughter. "But," I continued, glancing toward my sister, "I'm glad she found someone who sees that and loves her for it. And I hope this is the start of something steady and kind for both of you." I lifted my glass. To Brooke and Nathan. It was safe. It was polite. It also wasn't the whole truth. I sat down, my pulse a little faster than before, and felt the weight of Nathan's gaze again. This time, when I met his eyes, I didn't look away. He cleared his throat softly, shifted in his chair, and turned slightly in my direction. "Actually," he said, voice carrying just enough to cut through the low murmur of post-toast chatter, "if it's all right, I have a question." Silence is a strange thing at a table full of people. It doesn't fall all at once. It ripples, pockets of quiet expanding as conversations die mid-sentence, faces turning toward the unexpected sound. Within seconds, nearly every eye under the tent was on him. Nathan's body angled fully toward me now, his chair turned halfway, his arm resting lightly on the back. His expression wasn't hostile or amused. It was intent. "Harper," he said slowly, "what exactly do you do at the courthouse?" For a heartbeat, my mind emptied. No one moved. No one filled the space with a joke or an interruption. Brooke's hand, resting on his forearm, stiffened. My mother's shoulders tightened. My father's grip on his glass paused halfway to his mouth. The script Brooke had written for this night, what she did, what Nathan said, what we all played along with, didn't have a line for this. For the first time all evening, the story wasn't under her control. The question hung there between us, fragile and explosive all at once. And I knew, with startling clarity, that however I answered, there would be no going back. Everyone watched me like the wrong word might crack the table in half. For most of my life, I'd chosen the safe answer, the smaller version. This time, the truth felt lighter than the lie. I set my glass down, the stem touching the linen with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. The tent hummed with low, expectant quiet. Beyond the open side, the marsh was a dark blur, the last of the light fading from the sky. Inside, under the string lights, there was nowhere to hide. For a second, I looked at my hands instead of at him. They were steady. That surprised me. I thought about the years of swallowing explanations before they could form, of letting conversations slide away the moment they brushed against what I really did. I thought about standing in my apartment mirror in the mornings, sliding my arms into my robe, knowing that the version of me who walked into the courtroom would never be invited to sit at this table. I lifted my eyes to Nathan's. He was still waiting, his expression open, puzzled, a crease between his brows that hadn't been there earlier. Beside him, Brooke's smile had frozen. My mother stared down at her folded napkin. My father's gaze bounced between my face and the centerpiece, as if either might offer him a cue. "I'm a judge," I said. The words were simple. They didn't come out louder than normal or dressed in drama. They just existed finally, in the same space as the people who'd refused to hold them. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. The lights hummed. A fork slipped from someone's fingers and clinked against a plate. Then the silence shifted. It wasn't the sharp intake of breath you see in movies, no chorus of gasps. It was subtler, a collective tightening, shoulders drawing in, eyes widening a fraction. My mother's head jerked up, color draining from her face. "What?" she whispered. though I was close enough that she didn't need to. My father's hand, still wrapped around his glass, eased it back to the table like it was suddenly fragile. He blinked hard, as if trying to clear a fog. Brooke laughed, the sound thin and brittle. "Okay, Harp," she said, waving a hand. "Funny. She's good, right?" She turned to the guests near her, inviting them into the joke. "Can you imagine? Harper as a judge." No one laughed with her. Not yet. I didn't look at her. I kept my gaze on Nathan. His face had changed in a way I recognized from court, when a witness says something that rearranges the entire case in your head. His posture straightened. His eyes sharpened, searching my features with new urgency. "Judge," he repeated quietly. "As in, on the bench, at the Justice Center." "Yes," I said. He said my name slowly, like he was pulling it from a file. "Harper Lane." My chest tightened, but I kept my tone even. "Yes." He leaned back a fraction, his gaze narrowing, then widening as something clicked. "Judge Lane," he said, the title landing between us like a dropped gavel. "From the Hargrove case." The recognition rolled through him in stages, visible even in the low light. First, disbelief, brow creasing, mouth parting. Then replay, eyes unfocused, seeing some other room, other day. Then certainty, the kind that doesn't ask permission. "I stood in your courtroom," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "More than once." A murmur rippled down the table, people glancing between us, between him and Brooke, between me and my parents. My mother's lips parted, closed, parted again. My father shifted in his chair, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his napkin. "What are you talking about?" Brooke demanded, her voice too loud in the hush. She turned to Nathan, her hand tightening on his sleeve. "She works admin. She files things. You've met her, like, twice." Nathan didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on mine, steady now, the confusion burned away. "No," he said. "I know admin work when I see it. And I know what a judge looks like." The tent seemed smaller, the ceiling of lights lower. Every sound outside, the soft lap of water, the distant hum of a passing car, faded under the weight of his words. "You were on the bench," he continued, his voice calm but edged with something like surprise and respect tangled together. "Black robe, hair pulled back. You listened more than you spoke. When you did speak, everyone shut up." A corner of his mouth twitched. "You called me out when I glossed over the change order. You denied sanctions but gave us the clarifications we needed. I remember thinking you were young for how much authority you carried." A flush crept up my neck, but I didn't drop my gaze. Across the table, Caroline stared at me like I'd just stepped out of another language. "You're a judge?" she asked slowly, as if testing the word. "Yes," I said again. "I was appointed 3 years ago." My mother's chair scraped softly as she shifted. 3 years, she repeated faintly. "Harper, you said you were assisting someone." "You said." "I said I was working at the courthouse," I replied, my voice steady. "That was true. At the beginning, I did assist. I told you when I was sworn in. Once." My father frowned, searching his memory. "You said you'd moved up. We thought you meant a different desk." I tried to explain, I said. But every time I started, someone changed the subject. "You worried I'd scare off men." Brooke said no one wanted to date Judge Judy. After a while, it was easier to let you keep your version. Brooke's face flushed, anger bleeding through the shock. "So this is my fault now," she snapped. "You let everyone believe you were admin. You chose that. And now you drop this in front of my fiancé's entire family? What, to make me look stupid?" "I didn't drop anything," I said. He asked me a direct question. Nathan's jaw tightened. Why didn't you say anything before tonight? He asked, but the question wasn't accusatory. It was curious, bewildered. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Because whenever my job came up, the conversation died, I said. Eyes glazed over. Someone made a joke. It didn't seem worth fighting about at Thanksgiving. Maddie shifted beside me, her hand brushing lightly against my arm under the table. A quiet affirmation. Around us, reactions settled into clearer lines. My uncle stared at his plate like it might offer an escape hatch. A cousin's mouth hung slightly open. One of the Carter relatives, an older man with a careful haircut, gave me a look that could only be described as reassessing. Grandma Lola, small in her chair a few seats down, reached across the space between plates and glasses until her fingertips touched my wrist. Her skin was cool, her grip surprisingly firm. I always knew there was more to you than they were saying, she murmured. You walk different when you think no one's watching. Brooke pushed her chair back a few inches, the legs grating against the stone. This is unbelievable, she said, her voice rising. You could have corrected people any time. You waited until my engagement party to announce you're some big shot? You wanted to steal the attention. You always do this. I met her glare, felt the years of swallowed replies lining up behind my teeth, and chose only one. No, I said quietly. I have spent years doing the opposite of that. She blinked, thrown off by the calm. Oh, come on. I let you talk over me, I continued, still even. I let you shrink what I do into something you were comfortable with. I stopped asking you to see me. Tonight, for once, I just answered honestly. You're the one who made my job a punchline in front of your guests. Her mouth opened, but no quick retort came. Nathan shifted again, finally looking at her. She didn't bring this up, Brooke, he said. I did. You've known, Brooke accused, turning on him. You knew she was a judge and you didn't tell me? I didn't know, he said, and there was a note in his voice I hadn't heard before. You never used her last name when you talked about her work. You called her my sister who does admin stuff, or my sister who never left that courthouse job. You never once said, Judge Lane. His gaze slid back to me for a moment, rueful. If you had, I would have connected it a lot sooner. My parents sat frozen, caught between their two daughters. My father finally found his voice. Why didn't you push harder? He asked, sounding more lost than accusing. Why didn't you make us understand? Because every time I tried, I said, you looked away. I let the truth sit there, not harsh, just honest. I thought if I forced it, you'd be proud for a day and uncomfortable forever. So I stopped trying. No one rushed to contradict me. The stillness that followed wasn't empty. It was full of all the things no one had wanted to admit. Brooke stood suddenly, her chair scraping hard this time. Heads turned, following the movement. This is my night, she said, her voice shaking with anger and something more fragile under it. You couldn't give me that? You had to make it about you. You always find a way. I stayed seated. I didn't apologize. I answered a question, I repeated. That's all. Nathan rose more slowly, his expression tight. Brooke, he said carefully, the way you've talked about your sister, knowing now who she actually is, he trailed off, searching for words. Don't you start, she snapped, turning on him. You're supposed to be on my side. I'm on the side of the truth, he said, and there was no performance in it. And I can't unhear what you've said about her. Or how comfortable everyone has been treating her like she's less. The sentence hung there, damning in its simplicity. For the first time since I sat down at that table, Brooke seemed to see the room clearly. Her eyes moved over the faces, our parents, his parents, cousins, colleagues. No one was chuckling now. No one was nudging a neighbor with a shared joke. Even the ones trying to look neutral had the tight, guilty set of people who know they've laughed at the wrong thing. Something flickered across her expression, quick and raw. Fear, maybe, or the vertigo that comes when the ground you've always stood on shifts under your feet. You all act like I'm some kind of monster, she said, but the heat had drained from her voice. Like I did this alone. You never asked her either. You liked the story as much as I did. No one rushed to deny that, either. She looked at me one last time, eyes bright and unreadable. Congratulations, Judge, she said. The title twisted into something between admiration and accusation. You finally got their attention. Then she turned and walked toward the house, heels striking the stone in sharp, even beats. The glass door slid open, swallowed her, and clicked shut behind her, the sound too soft for how final it felt. The tent didn't collapse. The lights didn't flicker. The marsh didn't swallow the backyard. The party, in its technical sense, was still intact. But the center of gravity had moved. Nathan remained standing for a moment longer, his jaw working as if he were chewing on words he couldn't quite say in front of everyone. Finally, he looked at me. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for not seeing it sooner. For not asking a real question until now. I held his gaze, searching for any hint of condescension or performance, and found none. You asked tonight, I said. That's more than most have done. He nodded once, then glanced toward the house. I should check on her. Of course, I replied. He pushed his chair in carefully, the small motion oddly respectful, then crossed the tent and disappeared inside. The room exhaled in his wake, conversations picking up in stilted starts, like people testing the air. At my elbow, my mother's hand finally moved. She reached for mine, fingers trembling. Harper, she said, her voice small in a way I'd never heard it. Why didn't I know my own daughter? The question was too big for this table, for this night. But for the first time it was being asked at all. The morning after Harbor Point was so quiet it felt staged. No clinking glasses, no speeches, no one watching me out of the corner of their eye. Just sunlight on my bedroom wall and the low hum of the city waking up beyond my window. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up replaying what I should have said or what I should have swallowed. The memories of the night before were sharp and clear, but they didn't come with the usual weight of regret. I lay there and let them pass through, Brooke's brittle laugh, Nathan's voice when he said, Judge Lane, my mother's hand shaking in mine. The world outside my window kept moving, cars passing, a dog barking, a siren in the distance, as if nothing monumental had happened at a table under rented lights. My phone, abandoned on the nightstand, started its own kind of noise not long after. Missed calls. Voicemails. Messages stacking on top of each other until the notifications formed a solid wall. There were long paragraphs from relatives, some apologizing, others just wanting to understand. There were shorter ones from people I hadn't heard from in years, suddenly eager to reconnect now that they knew I came with a title. My parents had each left a voicemail, their voices raw in a way I wasn't ready to listen to yet. I scrolled past them without pressing play. The only message I opened was from Maddie. No matter what they do now, you did the right thing. Proud of you. I typed back a simple thank you, knowing she'd hear the rest in the silence. Around midday, there was a knock at my door. For a second, I considered ignoring it. Then habit won. I checked the peephole and found Nathan in the hallway, hands in his pockets, suit traded for jeans and a plain shirt that made him look younger, less polished. He looked like he hadn't slept much. Can we talk? He asked when I opened the door. We sat at opposite ends of my couch, a coffee table and 2 cooling mugs between us. Up close, without the engagement party as a backdrop, the disconnect between the man from court and the man from Brooke's feed felt even starker. He didn't launch into a speech. He didn't defend anyone. I can't stop thinking about last night, he said finally. About how I stood in front of you in a courtroom and respected you there, then sat across from you at dinner and let Brooke talk about you like you were background. You didn't know, I said. It wasn't an absolution, just a fact. I didn't ask, he corrected. I didn't question the version of you I was handed because it was easier not to. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. I don't know yet what last night means for me and Brooke. That's something we have to untangle on our own. But I know I can't pretend it didn't happen, or that it doesn't say something about both of us. I nodded. The specifics of their relationship weren't mine to manage. What mattered to me was simpler. I'm not asking you to pick a side, I said. I just needed to stop pretending I was smaller than I am. I get that now, he said quietly. He stood to leave a few minutes later, pausing at the door. For what it's worth, Judge Lane, I meant what I thought in that courtroom. You were fair. You were good at it. I'm sorry the people closest to you didn't see it first. After he left, the apartment felt different. Not emptier. Just honest. There was no performance here, no roles to slip into. My robe hung over the back of a chair, my case files stacked neatly on the table, my life arranged exactly as it was, not reduced to a one-line summary. 2 days later, Brooke showed up unannounced. No makeup. Hair twisted into a careless knot. She stood in my doorway like someone who'd taken a wrong turn and wasn't sure if she wanted directions or an exit. Can I come in? She asked. We didn't hug. We sat opposite each other, the same couch that had held Nathan and his questions now holding my sister and hers. For a while, neither of us spoke. The quiet between us wasn't the easy kind, but it also wasn't the brittle, competitive silence we'd carried for years. I was scared, she said finally, eyes fixed on her hands. Of being ordinary. Of waking up one day and realizing I was just another girl from Willow Creek who never got out. You did get out, I said. Not the way you did. She looked up then, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something beyond the practiced gloss. You walked into rooms I can't even imagine and made people listen. And every time you got closer to that, I felt myself shrinking. So I made jokes. I made you smaller so I didn't have to feel it. There was no neat way to untangle that. No clever line to fix it. I've never wanted you to be less, I said. I just didn't want to keep disappearing so you could feel more. She swallowed, nodding like the words landed where they were supposed to. I don't know how to do this differently yet, she admitted. But I don't want to keep pretending either. We weren't suddenly close after that. There was no montage of shared coffee dates and sisterly selfies. What shifted was quieter. At the next family dinner, my parents stumbled over their questions about my work. What kinds of cases? How many people in your courtroom? But they asked, and then they stayed in their chairs long enough to hear the answers. My father didn't change the subject halfway through. My mother didn't rush to soften the edges with a joke. Maddie caught my eye across the table and smiled. Just a little. Grandma Lola patted the seat next to her like she'd been saving it all along. Brooke showed up late, as usual, but when she slid into her chair, she didn't introduce me to anyone as admin, she didn't say much about me at all. For now, that was enough. I used to think staying quiet was the kindest thing I could do. That if I kept my head down and my voice low, the people I loved wouldn't have to confront their own insecurities or adjust their expectations. But silence didn't protect them. It just taught them how small they were allowed to make me. The night at Harbor Point didn't hand me a new family or erase old habits in one dramatic scene. What it did was simpler and more permanent. It put the truth in the center of the table and refused to let anyone push it to the side. I didn't flip the script to become the star of their story. I finally insisted on being the full version of myself on my own. If you've ever found yourself shrinking to fit someone else's comfort, remember this: you don't owe anyone a dimmer switch on your life. The The people who only know how to love you when you're small were never seeing you in the first place. Thanks for watching. Kindly subscribe to my channel for more.